very major Renaissance and the Shakespearean drama, which is going to be delivered by me, myself, Dr. Andruti Shah Rathi from Department of English. So today what I'm going to do, I'm going to talk about the Shakespearean play, and the title of the play is A Midsummer Night's Dream. So this is the part of your block 3, unit 3. So we are going to talk about that one, block 3, where the content which is being given to you is A Midsummer Night's Dream. So here, the main things which I am going to talk about is the dreamlike quality of the play. Number one, that means ki if you just look towards the title itself mentions A Midsummer Night's Dream. So where we people are talking about a midsummer night dream. So this play is all about the various dreams and the dreams that various characters seem to experience. Apart from that, I'm going to talk about the notions of the Neoplatonism and would like to make a beautiful, insightful point about how there is a kind of a sense of love without power or control that finds a kind of an expression in a dreamlike quality of display. So, first of all, if I start display, so as I was telling you earlier, before I start presenting my slides also, when I started my lecture, I gave you a brief discussion about what is the concept of a drama. And when we people are talking about the drama, so drama is again being divided into three different segments. One segment is the tragedy, second segment is the comedy, and third segment is tragicomedy. So this is how we people have divided the drama. Till now, we were just going through the Shakespearean, one of the biggest tragedy, that is Hamlet. And where we people were talking about the concept of the tragic hero and fate, how the person is someone who is responsible for his own failure. Now, here there is a kind of a concept of a comedy, and especially if we are going to read this play, so we are going to read this play in the notion of the romantic comedy. So, comedy is a kind of a concept which is totally different from the tragedy, because in a tragedy, this is what we people have seen, the main hero dies. Wherever we people are talking about comedy. So comedy is something which is dealt with a kind of a unification. Unification means there is a hero, there is a heroine, and finally they end up in a kind of a marriage. So that is how we frame a kind of a structure of a comedy. So during Elizabethan time, during the Shakespearean time, so when we people are talking about Shakespearean comedy, so there are many sources that can be identified in the tragedy, but Shakespeare really had no pattern or a paradigm as he had in tragedy, because where he was trying to come up with a kind of a concept of comedy, there were some precursors of this kind of a comedy, but they can be like Thomas Green or Lily in the poetry on the romances. But we should always remember, and this point is something which is focused, that Shakespearean comedy is something which is centered on love. So here I would like to give in this lecture, the idea of the dream in midnight dream, a midsummer night dream, as well as I am going to talk about why this play is something which has been titled as a romantic comedy. So before that, let me share my slides with you people. Is my screen visible? Is my screen visible to you all?
Yes, madam.
Yes, ma'am. Yes.
Okay.
Yes, it is.
Okay, thank you. So here, this is what we people are going to talk about. That means Midsummer Night Dream, which can be categorized in a form of a romantic comedy. So here, where we people are talking about that, what you already know about Shakespeare and his plays. So as we people are already aware that Shakespeare, if we just go through the background of the Shakespeare, so Shakespeare was someone who was born in Stratford, England, and he was born in the month of April 1564 and he died in 1660. So this is the time period of the Shakespearean age. As the next point suggests that he was both an actor as well as a playwright. And this is what we people have seen in the concept of the theatre, that whenever there were certain kind of the performance or whenever there was a kind of a play which was being performed, so the main lead, the main role was something which was being enacted by the playwright or the author or the writer of the play, because he believed that whatever justice can be done, he can give the justice to the play. So that is where we can categorize Shakespeare both as an actor as well as a playwright. So earlier, what he has done, his basic studies were through his own. He has done all his studies by his own, and Shakespeare was the one who lived 400 years ago in England. So during that time, Elizabeth I was the Queen of England, and the condition in which he lived was something which interested him and his audience. So that is why, if we see, if you might have gone through the text of Shakespearean A Midsummer Night Dream, so you might have seen that Shakespearean English is some slightly very different, because this is what we people have seen. Englishman or women, they find Shakespeare as very strange. So Shakespearean audience is, however, would not have found him strange, because whatever plays he has performed, he has produced a marvelous plays and so many things he had done. Till now, this is what we people have seen, that he has totally written 37 plays. And when we people are talking about what are the themes, what are the topics on which Shakespeare used to write, so Shakespeare based all his plots on the models which were being used in the classical and Greek and Roman literature. So classical Greek and Roman literature, and that was the time period of the Renaissance, and where people were inspired by the theatre of the Greek, and that is what they wanted to produce. That means Queen Elizabeth individually, which is being called as a first virgin queen. So she is the one who used to promote the art and culture, and she was very inspired by the architect of the Greeks. So that Renaissance can be considered as a rebirth, and that rebirth can be considered as a new foundation or a new study of any age. So that is what they had done. So Shakespeare, whenever he used to write the play, so all the plays were something which were being hinted from either the Greek tragedies or some of the Roman theatres. That is what he has reproduced. So here, this is what we people have seen when we people were studying the Hamlet. So even the source of Hamlet was something which was being taken from the another play, and that the title of that play was Hamlet. So there came the concept of the comedy as well as the tragedy. So here, when we just look towards the line, if we just follow the line of the tragedy, so this is what we people have seen, that hero, tragic hero, and that hero is someone just because of certain kind of the flaw, just error in judgment, he is someone who meets a kind of a drastic fall. He is not bad. Individually, he is not bad. And that is, if we just go back to our previous lectures, This is what we people have seen. If we just look towards Dr. Faustus, if we just look towards Hamlet, so all these people were not responsible for their own failure, the situation, the condition. And the main concept of the drama was to provoke a kind of a feeling, and that feeling was something which can be considered as catharsis. Catharsis is where we feel a kind of a pity or a fear inside the mind of the audience. So that is something which a drama or a tragedy produce that kind of an effect. On the other hand, when we people are talking about what romantic comedy is, so if we people are talking about Midsummer Night Dream, it is something which is a comedy and it is filled with puns, it is filled with creative insert, magic, and more. And there are another segment which this play deals, and this play contains a play within a play. So that was a new concept that people are watching, people are going to a theater to watch a play, and within that play, there is a new concept, and that concept is something that means there within that play there will be a kind of a play which is being performed. Same was there in the Hamlet also. In Hamlet, there was a play within a play, and that was Mousetrap. The title was something which was a mousetrap. So now, where we people are categorizing this play into the broad genre of the comedy, and especially the romantic comedy. So, what is the main concept of the romantic comedy? So, the concept of the romantic comedy is very simple. I think I don't know what you people will think about it, but this is something that there is a girl and there is a boy. The girl is of a marriageable age and the boy is also of a marriageable age. That means here the age group which they represent is the marriageable age for them during the Shakespearean time was 18. So both that means and same society. So both these boy and girl they fall in love with each other. So now what will happen if they had fallen in love with each other? So definitely they will get married. But if we are talking about a love story and if the content is a love story and if it's so simple that the boy loves the girl and girl loves the boy and finally they get married, so what is the plot all about? Why the people will go and watch that comedy? So here is the concept. Romantic comedy is something which deals with the subject, and that is the theme is love. But here, where we people are talking about that the girl falls in love with the boy or the boy falls in love with a girl, then there is a kind of an impediment. Now, what the impediment is? So, where we people are talking about impediment, so impediment means the obstruction. That means if they are going to get married, so their life is not easy. They will not get married easily. So what are these impediments? That impediments can be either the brother or the father who will act as an obstacle, one an impediment. Second impediment can be maybe money, that can be an issue. Third impediment may be society. Maybe the boy may be of a rich family and the girl is not of a rich family, so their family doesn't match. Fourth impediment is that means there is a kind of a misunderstanding in their relationship. Misunderstanding. So now what do you mean by a misunderstanding? Misunderstanding means this act as a impediment. That means there can be a kind of an eavesdropping or there can be any kind of a miscommunication between the hero and the heroine, and finally there is a kind of a break in their relationship. But since it is a comedy, so it ends with a kind of a unification and it ends on a happy note, and that is what we people have seen. That is, it ends with a kind of a marriage. So here, if we just lead it further, So that is what we have seen. So some of the characters, as I was telling you, the concept of the comedy which he has brought. So he was very, very inspired from the theater of the Greek mythology. So the even the characters which are being presented over here. So that is Theseus and Hippolyta came from the Greek mythology. Theseus can be considered as a national hero of Athens. On the other hand, Hippolyta was the queen of Amazon, and she was one of the female warriors. So this is Theseus took Hippolyta as his prisoner, and finally he subsequently married her. So all these are someone whom Shakespeare has woven in a form of the characters, and this is how he has presented this play. So when we people are talking about the dating and the performance, so when this Midsummer Night Dream was performed, so this Midsummer Night Dream was a play which was being performed in the second half of the 1590, and that was the time period, that means during 1598, this play was something which was being written. So here, where we people are talking about the concept of, so these are certain kind of the lines which they have used. So here, the word which is being created over here. So the word is created as we enter from the Athens. So that is a place, and we end into a kind of a word, and that is here Shakespeare has used a kind of a comedy to create a kind of a dream-like world. So the word is something which is being created when we enter from the Athens into the forest. And in this play, we find everything. In this, there is a kind of a dream, there is a kind of uh, the fairies, there is a kind of human beings. So all these are there who are present. So that is why he has suggested this kind of a title. What was Midsummer Night Eve? So this was something. Midsummer Night is something which has been celebrated during the ancient time, and especially during the month of the summer, and that was June, and that is where they are saying that there were certain kind of the plants they used to bloom at this time, and they were having a kind of a miraculous healing powers. And on the other hand, this kind of a celebration which was being done to protect uh, against evil spirits. So that means they used to lit a kind of a bonfire, and that bonfire was something that was used to the uh, protect from us from the evil spirits. So that is how the play was first performed. So here, where we people are talking about this play in the line of the love. Okay, so what is love? Why do people fall in love? And why people are out of love? And how this concept of love is something which is that is a kind of a form or a genre which was in a piece of a literature, and that was something which was written in a form of a Midsummer Night Dream. So when we call this Midsummer Night Dream, so this can be categorized as a romantic comedy. So why this is being something which is being categorized as a romantic comedy? Because here this was a kind of a comedy which was being performed on the 16th century on the stages of England with a very concept identifiable that was very easily identified, and that identified formula is that that means a love story between a boy and a girl. So that is what we have seen. So romantic comedy always have a kind of a main plot as well as the subplot. So the main plot is an eligible aristocratic man and a woman who fall in love with each other, but they cannot marry for some reason. So that is what I was saying, that they cannot marry. Why they cannot marry? Because there will be a kind of an impediment. There can be any kind of a reason, social incompatibility, or their families may have a long outstanding quarrel, or it could be that a man and woman do not realize that they are in love. So, where the man and woman do not realize that they are in love, the best example for that is the relationship between Benedict and Beatrice, and a very famous romantic comedy which was being written by Shakespeare. That the title of that comedy is Much Ado About Nothing. On the other hand, there can be the marriage and the or the intention to marry is celebrated with a dance and a feast, and this is what we people have seen over here also. So that means our lover in control of their destinies. So destiny is already destined since both of them belong to an aristocratic family. So here it is something which is very relatable to the kind of a comedy which Shakespearean drama have produced. And this is something which is known as comedy of manners. Comedy of manners is something which is a very elite kind of a comedy where there are the aristocratic people and those people fall in love with each other. They use puns, they use certain kind of the tricks, but they had a kind of a class. It's not disgusting, it's not something which is very very bad, it's not offensive. So that kind of a comedy which happens between the aristocratic class is something which is known as comedy of manners. So in the next segment, what we people are going to talk about, we are going to talk about the comedy of humor. And that was something, so there is a kind of a class conflict when we people are talking about these two comedies. The aristocratic people will talk about the comedy of manners, they will represent everything in a very classy way, and where we people are talking about the people of the lower community or that kind of a thing. So there the people will be more blunt. So that is something, and that kind of a concept was something which was being evolved by Ben Jonson, and that is where what we people have seen. And the title of the play is The Alchemist, even the Sherdean's rival. So these depict these kind of the comedy of manners as well as the comedy of humors. So here, where we people are talking about these kind of the comedies, the setting of the Shakespearean romantic comedy is set in some place that is remote and distant from England. So the places which Shakespeare have used, so that is Messina or Athens or Padua. So these are the words. And where we people are talking about Athens, and so the remoteness adds a kind of a fairy tale quality of comedy. So here, this is how he draws a kind of an attention. The action begins in the court, but since it is the court that lovers' marriage is obstructed, they leave the place that is close to the nature, such as forest or a village or some ideal pastoral setting that encourages a kind of a love and fertility. So, having found fulfillment, they return in the court or a city which is transformed by their joys into a healthier place that no longer stands the way in the of love. It never stands in the way of love. So, the main agenda or the main purpose of the romantic comedy is to emphasize on the accepted social value. Even though the love ends in a marriage, but it is allowed, but adulterous or obsessive love is not allowed. So there is a kind of a purity in that love. Anything that threatens the harmonious functioning of a society is gently but firmly eliminated or corrected. So, in the end, I would just like to say that the chief function of a romantic comedy is to entertain. It is not there to direct. So, here, that is the kind of a formula, that is the formula of the romantic comedy, is something which Shakespeare has used in A Midnight Summer Dream. So that is what Shakespeare have used in this play. So in the next one, so if we just look towards the theme of the love, so the love is something which can be considered as the central theme of the play. So this is how we have seen that we will look. That means there are three stories which are going on, and there are so many plots and there are so many subplots which are being represented. So first of all, this is what we have seen, that first the forest obviously represents a pastoral word which these aristocratic Athenians, Lysander and Hermia, they run away. So the story, the background of the story is something which I would like to tell you. So here, um, Hermia father name is the Duke Theseus. So Theseus is the Duke of Athens who want that Herminia should get married to Demetrius. But the problem with Hermia is Hermia has already fallen in love with Lysander. So here somewhere their love is something, and she just directly comes in front of her father and she says that I don't want to marry this man Demetrius. Instead of that, I wanted to get married to Lysander, which is not being accepted by the father of this girl, Hermia. On the other hand, Demetrius earlier he used to love another girl, and the name of that girl is Helena. Helena is a very good friend of Hermia. Helena had already fallen in love. She had a kind of a feelings of love for Demetrius, but Demetrius, he being a philanderer, what he thinks now, he says that he is okay with that kind of a relationship, that he says that now I do not love Helena, but I had fallen in love with Hermania. So somewhere Helena is sad, and what she does, Hermia, she says this thing to her close friend Helena, that see, my father is not accepting this kind of the relationship which I'm having with Lysander. So now me and Lysander are going to elope from Athens because we do not want this kind of Athenian law to govern us, to force us. So we are going to leave this place. And she informs her best friend Helena, and she says that I'm going to run away with him. So once she leaves this kind of a place, this Athens, why they want to leave this place? Because they just wanted that once we will be going out, we are out of this law system, Athenian government law. So finally, what we are going to do? We are just going to get married over there, and finally we will come back. So these people leave. So they went to a kind of a forest, and that forest is something which can be considered as an enchanted forest. As I was telling you, that there is a kind of a content, and that content is something which can be considered as the fairies. So the fairies are someone who are governing that forest. So Lysander and Hermia, they just run away from Athens and they goes to a kind of a forest. In the meanwhile, Helena, she instigates Demetrius that my friend has gone and I'm worried about her. So I just wanted to inquire. So finally, these two people also, they just go in search of Hermia as well as Lysander. And finally, they are there, four of the people are there in the forest. So there is another kind of a plot which is being developed. So here, Shakespeare has not one but two subplots instead of two set of characters. So that is what one is the aristocratic and another one is the plebeian. So that is how he has set three sets of character. So on one hand, we have two characters, Helena, Hermia, Demetrius, and Lysander. And on the other hand, the third characters which are being included are the fairies. And those fairies are the additional group, but its aristocrats are Queen Oberon and Titania. So Titania and Oberon are having a kind of a fight. Both of them are lovers and they are the one who rules the forest and they are the fairies. So what they do, they are having a kind of a fight, and that is they quarrel, they threaten to live apart even though they are married. So what happens? So the male Oberon, what he thinks that he says that I just wanted to teach Titania a lesson. So how I'm going to teach her a lesson? I will just send her to the forest and let her live without me. So that is how the plot further develops. So it is again, there are so many kind of the magical things, magical spells which are being spoken, and in the plays it goes on that when Oberon and Titania are fighting, so it creates a kind of a drought-like condition or a thunder-like condition because when the fairies fight, so that creates a kind of a climate change. So that is why there was a kind of a disturbance in the nature. So that is how we people have seen. So he just wanted to teach her a lesson, and that is what he has done. He thinks and he has sent one of his um, person, and that is one of his um, fairy, and his name is Puck, and that Puck is someone who is very very rude, or he is a kind of a fairy who creates a kind of a trouble, and then he says that why don't you go and give a kind of drink to this Titania and just pour some syrup or just pour some liquid inside the eyes of Titania so that the first man she will see, she will fall in love with that man. So this fairy, what he does, he just feels it and he just follows the orders of Oberon. And on the other hand, there are other people. That means there are mechanicals. So these are the other characters. So what they are doing, these mechanicals are someone, six group of men, and what they are doing, they are performing a kind of a play and they are rehearsing it inside that forest. And why they are rehearsing it? Because there is a kind of a marriage which is going on, and that marriage is something which is between the Paramis and Thisbe. So that is, and for their marriage, for conducting their marriage, they are performing. So these are six group of people, and this Puck, what he does, he just comes and he transforms one of this mechanical into a kind of a shape, that means his head is of a donkey and the body is of man. So when these mechanicals saw that what has happened, one of our friend is being transformed into a donkey, so they just five of them they just ran away from the forest. So Titania is someone who is sleeping and just there is a kind of a liquid or an essence which is being poured inside her eyes. So the moment she wakes up, she falls in love with this donkey-like looking man. So the name of that person is Bottom. That one of the mechanical is Bottom. So Titania has fallen in love with that Bottom, and that is just because she is spelled under the magic. So that is how the story goes on. So actually, the concept is not where we are saying that, and then the spark is someone who is trying to make more. That means there are more misunderstanding which happens between the relationship of Helena. In the meanwhile, what happens is Spark pours some liquid inside the eyes of Demetrius as well as Lysander. The moment they wake up, they found Helena, and both of them claim that no, we had fallen in love with this girl, Helena. We want to marry her. In the meanwhile, Hermia is someone who is left alone, and she says that Helena is trying to mock at me, and that means it creates so many kind of the misunderstanding during that time. So this is what we have seen, that it is just a kind of a fairy land, and so many things. There are so many problems which are coming, and even the lovers, what they do, they face a kind of a problem, and that problem is something which we challenge or we question or we encounter. So that is how we people have seen. So these Athenian lovers and Titania are under Puck's magic spell. And Shakespeare is making a fun of the way lovers act in real life. So here that is why the title which suggests over here, Midsummer Night Dream, a Midsummer Night Dream. So the title itself suggests that actually it is a dream word. So dream word can be considered as the word which is being created, and as we enter from Athens into the forest among the world of the fairies, we should be aware of the challenges as well as the encounters which they are going to face. And that the word of the fairies seem to be almost exactly the same as the word of the human being. So if we just look towards the play begins for the quarrel between the father and daughter over choosing a husband. And the first line when the fairy queen and king meet is ill met by the moonlight. There is a quarrel and a desire for control. So this is what we have seen, that the play begins with number one, quarrel between the father and a daughter over choosing a husband. And on the other hand, the fairies fighting together. Why they are fighting? Because it's all about who wants to control or who wants to govern. So here, this is what we have seen. If we just look toward the situation of Oberon, Oberon wants to control Titania in the fairy land, just as the idea of control is implied in Theseus' warlike victory over Hippolyta. Because Hippolyta, she is a war prize and the father. So he gives us a kind of an attempt to control the daughter. So this is what we have seen. Even Hermia, because Hermia doesn't listen to her father's, what his father dictates. That is the question. Why is this movement away? So finally, what they did, they just decide to run away from the Athens into the world of a law, into an apparently a kind of a magical world. So that means from a real world, they are entering into a kind of a world where, which is dominated with a kind of a magic spell. And that is when we also enter in that word, where we find that it is in many ways the same because there are so many problems which arise over there. So when we people are talking about a dream word, okay, so what is a dream? So dream is like a kind of a word which is not a very pure word. Dream word can be considered as a word of a pure fantasy, but it has to be seen in terms of a certain ideas in Renaissance. Because when we people are talking about the Renaissance time, especially particularly Renaissance, in Renaissance, dream can be considered as a product of a Neoplatonic thought. I'm going to talk about this Neoplatonic thing, but first of all, I would just like to give you a kind of an information what were the two major challenges which was being made by Platonian art. So in Platonian art, this is where we have seen on one that art has no truth in it. And art has no truth in it. This is something which is being taken from Plato's book, that is Republic, book number 10. And the second statement which I'm saying, that is quoted from Republic, book number 3, particularly thereupon, which talks about that uh, art arouses passion. So, the control of reasons over passion, which is an axiom almost for Plato, is disturbed. So that is why, and that is this kind of a philosophy, this kind of a Plato's version is something that means wherever we are seeing a kind of a dream, so there we will find problems. That means something which arouses a kind of a passion, and so the control of the reason over passion is something which is an axiom. So here, when we are talking about the playwright or the artist, is either committed to the poems about the heroes and the gods, worship, otherwise honored, garlanded, respected, and thrown out of the so-called Republic of Plato. So now to answer this charge, we should first find number one, the point about the truth. We find here that the idea came from a Platonic academy in a following way. That is very briefly, because I'm not going to talk about what the Neoplatonism is, because this you are going to learn in the next series of the lecture, that is MEG block number, I think it's in 3 or 5 in literary criticism. So there you are going to have a brief note on Neoplatonism and Aristotle poetics. So you will get a kind of a background when you are going to go through what criticism is all about. So I'm just giving you a kind of a hint where I'm talking about that what that is where what Platonic theory is. So the Neoplatonic theory on cosmos was involved, that cosmos was involved with a kind of a chain of being, a continual graduated cosmos. When with the recovery of the classical values and the classical text in the Renaissance people they used to read Plato in original. So Platonic Academy, particularly in Florence, they used to believe certain kind of the theories, and that means the commentaries which was written on Plato on the basic of the original Greek text. So the Greeks they used to follow the theories of Plato as well as the Aristotle, and that can be when we are talking about the theories, or when we people are talking about the thought system of the Plato. So Plato argued not in a favor of a continuous chain, but He always argued about a kind of a concept, and that means there is a kind of a gulf always between finite and infinite, between the actual and the ideal. So, if we go back to the original text of the Plato in Greek, we are going to discover that instead of medieval Neoplatonic notion, it is a kind of a continuous graduated cosmos. So cosmos of Plato was always in two parts, which was being defined by a mutual negation of finite and infinite, ideal still terminology, which was being expanded. But where is the problem? What he was trying to talk about? That here he was saying that it is something which can be considered as a continuous process. So the continuous gulf between the finite and infinite is something which was limited to construct the notion of eros. So what is this eros? Eros is something which is being considered as an erotic cosmology. So erotic cosmology is something where, please excuse me. So man is someone who can be considered as a connecting link between the higher world as well as the lower world. So that is what we people have seen, because it is a man who is the center, because up there is the heaven and on the downside this was being believed that there is a hell. So, and it's the earth which acts as a connecting link between both these higher as well as the lower world. At once, the highest point is linked to the lowest point, and if we just talk about the inside of the man, of course, there is a kind of a dichotomy of spirit and flesh. So, that concept of the spirit and flesh, that was something which was being developed in the art also. And for him, it occupies a middle space, and that is there is no time, and that is where, when these people are talking about what is the ontology of art, what kind of a space does art occupy, so there Plato has given plenty and plenty of arguments, but there is no ideal definition of it. So even though where we people are saying about that what is the truth, what is the reality. So according to Plato, truth can only be accessed and acquired and approximated by a visible, sensible, the nominal word, that is the sensuous. So therefore the defense of art, or to use Shakespeare, constant use of the contrast, substance and the shadow, these are something which were to be found in the poetry, where we people are talking about the Shakespearean sonnets also. So that is something where we can see that the sequence, that romance is something which exhibit the great models of the Greece and Roman comedies. So that is where we have looked about. But the actually the main concept is that when this play was, that means where we people are talking about what truth is. Whatever we see is not truth. Whatever we dream is not reality. So what is reality? Because what we perceive, what is our perception leads to a different perception. When we try to look into an entire truth, so what the truth for us is, that is my perception. That cannot be any other person's perception. So that is what they are talking about. So that is where we are saying that whenever we are trying to move towards that truth, we will always refer to a kind of a theory, and that theory is over, that is which is unfinished. because again they will be followed by another attempt and the opposition, and it is not between the truth and false, but truth and another truth and another truth and another unending inclusive extension as if it is there. So this Midsummer Night Dream was, as I told you earlier, that it was a play which was being produced around 1595 and 96, and that was the same time when this Romeo and Juliet was written. So when it gives us some understanding of the Shakespearean mind, because when we read Romeo and Juliet, again the concept is the same. The story intends the love and the love of very young lovers, and then there is a kind of a sequence of a parental opposition, and that is so serious and which deals with a kind of a tragedy, and that is death, tragic death. Because of that, the story is try visited in Midsummer Night Dream, and that is dream in a form of a Paramus Thisbe performance, which rehearsed and planned, but for the wedding of Theseus by the artisans, the rude mechanicals are they called. So that is what we people have seen, and that is something which leads towards the kind of the love which is being presented over here. So, in this kind of a mind of a Shakespeare, in the same year, he has written, on one hand, he has written a tragedy, and that is the Romeo and Juliet, where this love is seen as great and intense tragic dimension. And at the same time, he's writing a play in which the same story is turned into a travesty. So, this is looking at a life is sometimes compared to a perspective. That is, one perspective will lead to another perspective, and finally an unending, and therefore the work becomes unfinished. So when we are talking about the criticism, when we people are talking about our own views, our own values, that is something which brings a new kind of a development. And that new development is something which is being shown through the work of literature. So that is what we have seen. So even in another plays also we have seen it. So what he has created. So Shakespeare in a form of so this is what we have seen. So Lysander often quoted a kind of a comment in the opening sets, and that is the tone for the lover's struggle. So that is what he has quoted, and that is something which is being given in the blue line, and that is the course of true love never did run smooth. So definitely there will be a kind of a hardship. There will be a kind of a struggle. So even though if you just look towards the play is something which focuses on the foolishness of the lovers, and the tone is something which is very light-hearted. But here it is something which will definitely lead to a kind of an appropriate, that is, which gives you a kind of a definition of a comedy. So the territory which is being marked over here is neither actual nor ideal. And therefore, this similarity is that when we enter the so-called dreamland. So it shows you a kind of a basic setting of a dreamland. The dreamland or the woodland, which we have seen in As You Like It. But here we enter into a different world, but at the same time, a similar world. Sometimes it becomes very confusing because here we find that there is a kind of a patriarchal kind of a problem with which the play begins. Midsummer Night Dreams, we enter into a kind of a patriarchy to a fairyland. But again, from the patriarchy to a kind of a fairyland, and that fairyland is again being governed by another kind of a rigid system. So that is something which can be said as the problem where Plato also talks about, that is the problems of the truth of art. Now, the second problem, of course, is that if we just look towards the text of the play. So, the second problem is something which arouses a kind of a passion. So, when we go inside a theater and when we come out, our balance and equilibrium is something which is all lost. Why? Because we are so much into the story. We are so much into the thought system which is being created. And for that, Aristotle has given a very good answer. That means here Aristotle is operating within the concepts and the categories of the Plato, that he does not, passion should not take over. Like, like that is what we have seen, like in the case of D.H. Lawrence, for instance, there is a kind of a reason, and that reason is something which can be considered as a controlling passion. But for him, the arousal of pity, the fear, the emotion, and that is what tragedy creates. That means, of course, the concept of the pity and fear. So that is how it arouses. So this arousal enables the dramatist to accomplish a kind of a catharsis of such emotion, and which arouses pity and fear, wherewith to accomplish the catharsis of such emotion for arousal is in the audience. So that is why with the audience goes into a kind of a setting which is being created by the playwright. They encounter themselves with the hero or the heroine, they matches themselves, and that is the kind of a condition where they are not in their own actual world, or nor in an ideal or invisible or an intelligible world merely, but that is a kind of a world which is somewhat controlled, and that the control is something which is being controlled by a form of an art, dance, music, rhythm, etc. So that is something which is very unlike with the life. So the first point which needs to be clear, that about Midsummer Night Dream, as why a Midsummer Night Dream where is a kind of a place where all the men are dreaming. It doesn't mean that it has a dream-like quality. Many people have talked about this, and this, like you know, that it is like a symphony, and symphony in a form of a musical symphony. Again, there is a kind of a very, because there are so many situations which are being presented over here. So these kind of the situations which are being presented in this play, we will see that here there is a kind of a question of ambivalence. And there is a critique, his name is Havel Brook. So he has noted that the moonlight is mentioned 28 times in the play. But there are no many meanings to the moonlight. It presents symbolically many ways of looking at the moonlight. Because where we people are talking about that when moonlight comes, that is the marriage of Theseus with Hippolyta. It takes place during the course of 4 days or a time. Then the new moon, when Lysander is accused of wooing Hermia by the moonlight. On the other hand, uh, Oberon and Titania. However, they are quarreled by the moonlight. So that is the time, how many times in the play, even the moonlight, there is a kind of a concept which they had brought, that the moon appears And the moonlight is something which is being mentioned around 28 times in the play. Even if we are talking about the root mechanicals, that is the artisans, Bottom and the company, they rehearse their plays by the moonlight, where the moonlight is itself nothing else, but it is a kind of a light, but just like a light. It is just like that. When we people are talking about the moon, so moon can be considered as a symbol of chastity, as a virginity. It is a symbol of fertility. And in the play, throughout, there is that sense of, that means these opposition of the truth. And that is what is Shakespearean ambivalent vision of the reality. That is not, I'm not saying that this is very peculiar, reducing credit to Shakespeare, but I think the Renaissance notion of the sculpture, they use the concept of sonnet or welter to turn around these kind of the contrasting concept of reality gradually building up with a totality. And in this way, they are trying to give a new form of the art. So if we just look towards the social structure. So now the question is, why does this, now we come to a question, why Shakespeare use this kind of the title? So here, if we just look towards this, so we will see more specifically, we will find that Shakespeare has used different kind of the words. That means specifically he has entrained to a fairyland, and the idea of there is on the other hand with the same kind of the problems and contaminated by the kind of the power relation in equation. So that is what we have seen. There is a kind of a violence when Lysander and Demetrius are arguing with each other for the love of Helena, because they are spellbound with a kind of a liquid which is being poured inside their eyes. So that is a kind of a misunderstanding which is being created in a play. So that is that kind of a magic spell is something. So from there, we have entered from an Athens to a magical word. And this magical word has sometimes, of course, can be used in a very psychological term. Psychological term, for this, I would like to quote the Freudian terms. That is where, especially if we just look towards the relationship of titanium and this person, that is where she has fallen in love with one of the mechanical. So that is where the relationship of the titanium and bottom relationship, it is shared with absurdities, and that is how, as per my judgment, we enter into a kind of a world which is supposed to be different but similar in many ways. Because titanium is someone, she is already married, and that can be considered as an extramarital affair. But she, in real world, she has not fallen in love with that donkey-faced man, that is Bottom, but they are sharing that kind of a relationship. So that is how, if we just look towards the social structure, so it is something which has been divided into the aristocratic class, the commoners, and the fairies. So all the men and female, the women, they play a very different kind of a role. So if we just, what kind of a word is this where we have entered? So we are not aware of within us, but especially if I'm talking about this particular peculiar to display, the most intimate friends, brothers or sisters, as it were, they fall apart suddenly in great hatred. So that is what we people have seen in this play. As if, for instance, for example, if I give you the example of the case of Hermia and her friend Helena, they were the closest friend, like double cherry, like two cherries of the same stem. There are very different kind of the examples. If we just say that Helena and Hermia, both of them, they grew up together. They learned everything together and they were like inseparable. So why has this come? This is the question which becomes very, very important. So the question is sudden onset of hatred, jealousy is something which is, this can be explained in one level of the play because there is continuous confusions which are being created by the magic of Puck. But it happens too often in Shakespearean comedy, and that is which renders to us a kind of a vulnerable, that is very, very vulnerable, and it leads us to a kind of a world of passion. The meaning of passion is very close to a modern used, the modern terms which we people are using. That means the word like the passive wording, like passive victim in the structure. That is what passion is. So people, they say this kind of a thing. So this is something which is a story which is being taken from a Greek mythology, and you can just have a kind of a read about this story. So people say that they go back to the Athens, these courtiers, the courtly love. That is all the structure is something which is being taken from the Greek mythology. And nothing has changed in Athens. Of course, nothing has changed. But a certain kind of a self-knowledge has been acquired by the characters, and that sense of the magic potion is a metaphor. And it is fun because this kind of a confusion which is being created is primarily in a form of a metaphor of a vulnerability to the world of the passion, the sudden onset. And then again, there is a kind of an onset of hatred, for instance, and then later Theseus, another comment upon the lover sleeping closed by each other, since close to each other, hatred and love suddenly brought back to you. So you will see the magic, but the magic is comment upon an inexplicity of human affairs, and there is no element of irrationality in Helena's love. Because where we people are talking about the Helena. So Helena love for Demetrius, who can be considered as a bit of a philanderer. There is a triangle in the beginning. To speak Hermia, she wants her husband as Lysander, as her husband, and her father wishes, again, not an uncommon motive in Shakespeare. Because as I was telling you, this is what we have seen. That is the basic plot of the romantic comedy, that there will be a kind of an obstacle. Either there will be a kind of an old man, or it can be a kind of a father who is not happy with the relationship of the boy and the girl who wishes to get married. So that is a basic plot which we have seen. And even in one of the tragedies which is being written, that is an uncommon motive, that is what is being mentioned in the play Othello also. So here there is a kind of a patriarchal endorsement. Helena, on one hand, is still in love with Demetrius, and Demetrius seems to be playing with her passion because he is a philanderer, and it seems that he was in love with Helena, but supposedly now he wants Hermia. But when these lovers, that is Lysander and Hermia, are given the choice, either sorry, Hermia is given another kind of a choice. So that is where the father is saying this kind of a thing that, okay, if you are not going to get married to a person of my choice, which I am wishing, so according to the father's wishes, either she should face the banishment or death or the banishment to a nunnery. So either she should remain unmarried forever. So that is why they decide to go away from the Athens to escape from this Athenian law. So that is the only condition, this kind of a banishment, this kind of a law, which her father was imposing on Hermia. That was the reason why they just wanted to refuse to the man Aegeus, whom her father was saying that you should get married or you become a nun. So that was there. So, but before going, they inform Helena out of friendship. And Hermia says that they are going to beyond the Athenian and the arm of Athenian law in order to get married or whatever. And Helena says that she would also like to go there, informing Demetrius before going there. So that is how all these four people leads to a kind of a place. So that she says that she want to enrich her pain, and this is strange, uh, and the psychological element here that almost bordering upon the masochist. She is very intelligent girl in the whole play, but she says one thing to Demetrius: treat me like your dog, but I do not mind. She changes later, it's true. So it is very different from the independence of Hermia. Is that scene is again very different. So here, but this is where it says this kind of a thing that she wanted to be like according to food. So there is a kind of an example which he is saying. It is described as a charity with two horses. One is a dark and one is white. The dark one want to possess the object of beauty at once. So this is a very psychological metaphor, of course, and it has to be tortured, whipped in order to bring into obedience. But the person, that is the charioteer, cannot make a journey towards truth and beauty and goodness without the two horses. So you need both these horses, whether it is a black horse or it is a white horse. So I'm not saying that Helena and Hermia correspond to the two horses, that there is an irrational or a darker element of love, but one of the most lyrical comedies people say. And there are so many, and people have said that many critiques, even with there is a kind of an oppression, that there is darkness of Helena's love. And then the discovery, where does it come from? Helena and Hermia fall apart. We discover that Hermia is capable of scratching with her nails the eyes of Helena. So this is the only violence which we will see inside the forest. So now if you go back to there, your dream, you will see that everybody has a dream. And they say with the strange dreams we have had in for the fourth act, where they wake up Demetrius on the other, and it seems far away like mountains. Sometimes it feels like we have just woken up from the dream. Oberon also says that that is Titania, when she is given the right, the potion, she will also wake up from a dream, because in her dream she had fallen in love with Bucket. That is someone who has a face of a donkey, and donkey means actually the mind of a donkey itself. But all these things which are being done by them is all in, they are lured inside, or they are into a kind of an enchanted spell, and the reason for everything is the puck. So that is who is turning them into there. So that is the only reason why Helena is following Demetrius. So here, this is what we people have seen, the violence inside. So it seems that even Oberon, that Titania, she is given a right potion. She will also wake up from the dream, and that is this kind of a magical flower which he uses on Titania. So, so we have said a fair amount about a dream, and that is again the question of the passion and the emotion which arouses, and you become a kind of an unbalanced person. So that is where which creates a kind of a misunderstanding, because sometimes what happens, the effect of unsetting reason control over passion, and almost it can be considered as an axiom. So Aristotle work, this is what we have seen, that this is the definition which I would neither why dream like, because this is not the actual word, but you go to play, and you know the relationship recognized is a relationship to the actual word. Clearly, not it is the ideal word we know, but aspire into the approximate into that. So that is where there is a kind of a mastery of a language, and that mastery is something which implicit the notion of a poetic form, and that mastery can be anything of a rhyme, rhythm, music, dance, a big theater, lots of dancing. Sometimes what happens, people or the students, they neglect the first part of the arousal of emotion. And if they fail in that part of the arousal of emotion, which is very, very important, then only they would accomplish the catharsis of such emotion. So, if someone is there who has gone to watch a kind of a theater, and if you are a more balanced person, so you are fully aware of the passion and the reason. So, and this passion and reason was something that means it was a kind of a concept in the Greek theater, that if someone is going to go, and it has a kind of, it works as a kind of a therapy. It has a kind of a ther- therapeutic kind of an element. That means if we feel pity, or if we share our emotion, it is something which can be considered as a purgation of thought, and it has a kind of an artistic effect which can be considered as a healing effect, where we attach ourselves with the pain of the character. So that kind of an impact is something which is going to lead you towards the purity of the thought, or the purgation of the thought. And finally, what will happen? We go home all purified. So that was the philosophy of Aristotle, and that was the concept of Aristotle's poetics, or catharsis, the concept of the catharsis. So now if we are going to put up the performance in the end, we have the familiar Shakespearean patterns where we are sitting in the audience and the bottom and the company are putting up the story, and there is another kind of a layer of a level of the audience, that is the courtiers who are sitting with Theseus and watching the play. So as I was telling you, so there is a kind of concept, and that concept is something which can be considered as the play within the play. So when we put up the performance in the end, we have a familiar Shakespearean pattern where we are sitting in the audience and we are watching. So the concept of the play within a play is something that means Theseus watching the play and they are making a fair amount of snide comment upon these plays, and they are doing but not realizing they are falling in love. So that is a kind of a satire which is being produced over here in the end of the play. Again, the use of the language, one means to make a point here is using a prose, of course, especially when the rude mechanicals are presenting the fairy exhausted blank verse over Theseus comes and announces the date of his marriage or whatever discussion, and sometimes rhymed couplets in opening people after you leave. On the other hand, we can see a virtual quarrel between Hermia when Hermia comes and she wants to marry Lysander. Father does not. Father chooses Demetrius. No reason is given, but he gives Aegeus and says, I'm sorry, I have right among in the rights over you and parental right, and that is again which is being supported by Theseus. So this is what we people have seen in the play. So we begin with that kind of a quarrel, but as we proceed, as we of course they go into a kind of a fairyland, and very, as I said, they discover that the problems same because their husband and one wife are quarreling over the position of a child. The famous example now, the point where the commonness is important because the bottom has a dream. Everybody has a dream. Bottom is actually one who comes and says, I had a strange dream. They have no bottom in it, but it is unable to relate the dream. What the dream is, he is unable to relate. He has seen a dream, but he is not able to mention what dream he has seen. On the other hand, now critics are perfectly free to see this in terms of a complicated modern psychology. Why not that there are very disturbed and strange things he saw? I think though it runs against the grain of the play, but anyway is possible. And I'm suggesting something else, and there is something else. That is something which we have seen in a classic case of Oedipus, where instance everybody forbids him to find about the past, including your custom, not only the profit that is used, but he wants to find out the past even though he knows. He knows the reality that happened in Oedipus also, that he was the one who has killed King Latis, and he realized that. But still, knowing everything, he just wanted to go back into his own past. He wanted to explore it. So, even though he want to find out the past, even though he knows, this sense is might that leads to a kind of a self-destruction, the truth at any cost. So, this is one way of looking at reality. So, that is a Socratic phrase, remember, which is often used. That is, unexamined life is not worth living, but humankind cannot bear too much reality. On the other hand, friendship, the relationship of the friendship, is again which we have seen. Love cannot begin, affection cannot begin without a measure of illusion. Sometimes what happens, we think mother is the best person in the world. That the first step to your love for mother or your husband or your friend, whatever this is, it is a kind of a wisdom. So we should see Bottom's dream and his inability to describe it in terms of this wisdom of folly, which enables us to live on the surface of the life. Because with the knowledge that underneath there is darkness, there is entanglements, and there are dangerous things underneath. So that is how we people have seen. It has created a sense of a comedy, and comedy in that sense is concerned with the survival. We survive, we do not rush or move to the truth at the cost of self destruction. That is a great tragic paradigm. But another paradigm is which of a grave diggers, of a common people, like that of beggars. So, and just think what Shakespeare plays actually about the common people. Let us say that is what we people have seen in the history plays and the life spent. So here the commoner is the bottom. So it brings up with a unconscious up to the surface. Similarly to the radiant surface is also. So that is my defense of folly of bottom. And people go back to their own happy marriage. Because there was a kind of a distressed form of a question. That means in the first scene when everybody leaves, that is a threat which is being given to Hermia. Either marry or choose celibacy, nunnery, or even execution. Necessarily severe punishment. But then they leave only Lysander and Hermia are on the stage, and then they speak in rather slitted kind of a language, metaphor, images, exaggerated hyperboles, heightened, somewhat outmoded devices used by sonneteers from Italy to England. For the lovers are doing because they are actually expressing their kind of love through this. And that is how the play ends. That this expression of intimacy, where you use this language self consciously, that suggests a kind of an implicit understanding between the two characters, and those two characters are Lysander as well as Hermia. So the theory, the use of the pause which he has used, the different kind of the speeches which is being used in Midsummer Night are something which brings a new end towards uh, this kind of the play. On the other hand, when we move further, so that is a kind of an affection is something which is being depicted by these two characters. because I would like to quote certain kind of the lines which they had mentioned in the play. These lines are something which are being taken. Um, Line number 271. Can you do me greater harm than hate? Hate me. Wherefore? Oh me, what a news, my love. Am not Hermia? Are you not Lysander? So, of this course, it is also related that the device of disguise, which is often being used in respect, there are many meanings of disguise, of course. So, on the other hand, there are some critics who says that the fairy land is not an Arcadia or a paradise before the form of a Satan and the fall of Adam, but it can be considered as an uncertain world, indefinable world between the actual reality. So that kind of a world is something which is being created. The themes and the preoccupations are the same in those of medieval philosophy. So all these things, that kind of the word which they are talking about is being presented in the play itself. On the other hand, uh, the language as well as the structure, the concept of the play within a play, the fairies, their roles in the play. Again, something which is very, very important is the characterization of the puck, and much of the thing which is being talked about in this play is uh, there where the mechanicals finally they come out in a form of a bad character, and that is what we have seen, that there are three groups of character in A Midsummer Night Dream, and that is the aristocrat, the fairies have moon common with them, and then we have the mechanicals. There are mortals, and the fairies are not, but the social leaders are the rulers. And where we people are talking about the mechanicals are someone who can be considered as a very separate kind of a group. Now, if we people are just talking about, so we have talked about the dreams. If we people are just talking about the concept of the woman, that how the women's are being displayed in the play, and what are the common qualities of the women which is being presented over here. So, A Midsummer Night Dream is a kind of a play which is full of confusion as it hovers between sleep and dreaming, and the characters are changing their minds for no known reason. And even the women in the play are still the center of the storm, and they provide a kind of a stability. And that is what we people have seen with the set of the lovers, that is the young Athenians, Titania and Oberon, Theseus and Hippolyta, Hermia, and on the other hand, Hermia and Helena, they never waver their commitments to men they love, even though they try to cope with the devastating change of the heart of these men. In contrast, where we people are talking about the men, that is Lysander and Demetrius, they respond to the puck mistaken application of the love juice by switching from a rivalry over one girl to a rivalry over another girl. So nothing essential changes in the attitude of the confrontation towards each other, making subjects of their love, which is almost irrelevant. And meanwhile, where we people are talking about the relationship of Oberon and Titania, they are so much locked in the rivalry over yet another love object, that is a young Indian changing child, that is Titania's charge. So finally, we have Hippolyta and Theseus, once rival and warrior enemies, but who have now put their quarrels behind them. And even where we people are talking about the relationship between Helena and Hermia, it is also characterized by a concept of a sisterhood where they extend and they see themselves as a double cherry. That means two cherries growing on the same stem. So, further, if you have to go through this kind of a play, how you are going to read this play. So, the takeaway from this lecture should be that means what is the concept a Midsummer Night Dream in a form of um, a romantic comedy. That is an important segment. This is what we have concluded. On the other hand, uh, Midsummer Night Dream as a dream play, that is an important segment which you should study as block C. Then that is another thing, the structure of the play, the concept of the structure of the play. That means there are three different words which are being presented. So again, you have to go through that agenda also, that topic also. The language of the play is again, which is very, very important. The theme is something, gender issues of the play, because we can see that there is a kind of a patriarchal dominance as well as here there is another thing which is important, and that is the main characters which are there in this play is the fairies who live in the forest and they interact with the mortals. So, what is their relationship? Another important character which is there in the play is the Puck. So, what is the Puck characterization and what is his function? So, these should be your takeaway from the play. And since it is a romantic comedy and it is a very light comedy, and as I mentioned you, that there should be a kind of an impediment, and that impediment is something which leads to a kind of a confusion, but the end is something which goes on in a very subtle manner, and the end is something which can be considered as where everything is sorted up. So that will be all for today. So I'm just going to wind up my lecture. First of all, I will just stop sharing the screen. Okay. So is there any question which you have to ask?
Yes, ma'am. I have a question.
Yeah, please ask.
First of all,
Just give me
I want to thank.
just give me 1 minute.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, now you can please ask the question.
First of all, I want to thank you for the amazing presentation. And my question is about the figurative language or imagery language that William Shakespeare used in A Midsummer's Night Dream. What kind of figurative language or imagery language Shakespeare has used in this play?
See, the figurative language, there are different kind of the styles which he has used, and that means that is a kind of rhetorical kind of a language where we can say that he has used certain kind of the pause. As I was telling you earlier, also that means the concept of the moon. That means the moon is something which is being presented 28 times in this play itself. So that means ki here the language or the passages which are being used over here, they are very lyrical. There are certain kind of the songs because songs are something which are very, very important. So we find a kind of a dramatic poesy and the lines which are being written, they are written in a form of a verse. So these are the forms and these are the languages which he has used in the play. Because whenever we are talking about the Shakespearean drama, especially the romantic comedy, it is always accompanied by the songs. So those songs are either in a form of a love songs. So where Lysander is there with Hermia. On the other hand, the quarrel, the fight which is going on between the Titania. So all these are in the presence of the moon. So what is the significance? So he's using a kind of a language, and that language is something which can be considered as a metaphorical kind of a language. Is there any other question?
Yes, madam.
Yeah.
So first of all, good evening to all of you and respected madam. And after that, I have a question regarding the language, as my one of my classmate or class fellow has told you. The language used in the play,
Mm-hmm.
all the scripts used there, they are very very difficult words because they are, I think, in 19 for example 20th century words. So there are lots of changes in words with the present day English. So how we can
Mm-hmm.
find out the description or paraphrasing of those play scripts?
See, as I told you in my lecture, in the earlier lecture when I was talking about in the beginning itself, Shakespeare is using a kind of a language, and that language can be considered as uh, Shakespearean English. So whenever we read a Shakespearean text, we go through a kind of a paraphrasing because the use of his this, thou, and the grammar which he is using, the verse which he is using is something which has a kind of a different meaning. So first we have to understand what he is trying to mention because where we are talking about in terms of the sonnets or in terms of the songs which he is using, so the language is something which is very different, very tough. Like if I'm saying that uh, there is a kind of a quotation from the textbook, and that is from Act 3, Scene 2, and that is line number 282 and 288. So, what does it say? It says that Herminia is saying, "You juggler, you canker blossom, you thief of love, what have you come to run night? You have stolen my love, my heart from him." So this is a kind of a conversation between Hermia and Helena. So earlier, Helena was thinking that she's mocking at me. These people are mocking at me, but actually, there is a kind of a fight which is going on between these two people. Then, in reply, Helena is saying, "Fine, I faith. Have you no modesty, no maiden shame, no touch of bashfulness? What you will see, a tear, impatient answers from my gentle tongue, fee, fee." So, this fee, fee again, which I'm saying, this can be considered as a typical, that means where she's saying, just go away, go away. So, we need a kind of a translation, we need a kind of a paraphrasing in order to understand Shakespearean language. If you are going to have a kind of a read of a text, for that you need a kind of a paraphrasing, and for that paraphrasing, you can just go to Project Gluttenberg. So, in that, you can get the true sense and the true meaning of the Shakespearean lines. Because in a limited time period, it will not be possible for me to do the paraphrasing. So it is understood for the MA students that they are going to have a kind of a brief knowledge about the text, and then only they are going to come and attend and the lecture. That is there.
Okay,
Because
ma'am. Thank you.
there, yeah, okay, thank you so much.
Good evening, Min. I have a question, please.
Yeah, please ask.
And the quotation of the William Shakespeare that said the course of true love never did run smooth. Can you explain it for us, please?
Can you please repeat?
The quotation, the course of true love never did run smooth by William Shakespeare. Can you explain it for us, please?
That means the course of true love is something which will never give you any kind of um, these are the very famous line which you are quoting, and that is a very beautiful term which you have said, that if we have fallen, and that is something which actually suggests the background of this romantic comedy, because where he is talking about that what is true love. So we cannot say that if we love someone, so all the love stories are not smooth until or unless we have any kind of a trials or turbulence. So that is even, I don't remember right now, but Shakespeare has written the concept of the love in one of his love sonnet, and that is sonnet number 116, where he is talking about true love. So true love is something which faces all the impediment. It is not something which is there for a physical beauty. That is something which goes up with, which is there with a kind of a physical attraction like rosy lips, cheeks. It is beyond all these things. So here, as I told you, this is the basic definition of the romantic comedy, which is being quoted from these kind of lines, which says that the course of true love never did run smooth. So automatically it means that the journey of the love is never smooth. We cannot find true love until or unless we go through trials and turbulence. On the path of love, there are so many tests. And that is what I was mentioning, that whenever we are talking about the structure of the romantic comedy, so that means there is a girl, there is a boy, both of them are of marriageable age, but there are certain kind of obstruction. So that is how the play develops, and finally they go in a kind of a pace, and finally they meet. It ends in a kind of a marriage, but there is a kind of a mistake, or there is a kind of a misunderstanding. So the line which is being mentioned, it suggests the same course of action. That means until or unless we are not going through a kind of a, everything is, life is not a kind of a smooth journey. If we want to find something, we have to struggle for it. And
Thank you,
yes,
ma'am.
thank you so much. Thank you so much. I hope I have your query is solved now, is resolved.
Yes, I got it, ma'am.
Okay, thank you. Yes, any
Uh,
other question? Yeah, please.
yes, of course. Many thanks, ma'am, from clear lectures. So I have a question about William Shakespeare. Did William Shakespeare all his comedies about love and his tragedies about falling in love, or did some tragedies and comedies about another subjects? Thank you.
Okay. Can you please repeat your question? One is about the love, another one is
About falling in love, about tragedy, and about falling in love.
tragedy and about falling in love.
Yes,
Okay,
yes.
so see, there it's in my last lecture, the previous segment where we are talking about the play again, which is being written by Shakespeare, and there we were reading that play in the forte or in the Yanare of the tragedy. So That is what we people have seen, that there was a kind of a love relationship between Hamlet and Ophelia. But Ophelia, she had fallen in love with this Prince Hamlet, but every time he was so much engrossed in a kind of a revenge for his father's murder that he was not able to give time to Ophelia. And Ophelia, being as a kind of a girl which was being governed by a kind of a patriarchal system, by a kind of a patriarchal community, that means where her father as well as her brother, they never wanted that she should get married to Hamlet. And in the end, during the course of the play, there we were talking about that Hamlet madness was something which can be considered as a ping madness. But since she was someone who was being suppressed, she was not able to give a kind of a chance to speak, to go against the will of her father. So that is why she turned mad and finally she committed a kind of a suicide. On the other hand, that can be considered as one of the major reason of her death. Secondly, this is what we people have seen in the case of the romantic comedy. Again, if we just look towards this Herminia, so this character is someone who has fallen in the love, but again she is a victim of this patriarchal community. She wanted to get married, but against the will of her father, she is not able to take any kind of a decision. And then only she, because this is what her father says, that either you banish yourself or you marry according to my will, or you practice nunnery. So, or you practice celibacy. So these are the three conditions. So this system, this law is something which she wants to escape. So they cannot raise their voice against the system. Getting my point? If you will just look towards the females which are being presented, especially in the Elizabethan era, the females do not have their own voice. They are all governed with a kind of a system, and that is they are suppressed or they are oppressed. And we will see that patriarchy plays a very important role. They just follow the will of their father or their husband. That is what is being reflected from the plays. So in these kind of the plays, but where we people are talking about the comedy. So in the comedy, this is what we have seen, that it is something which is being taken in a very subtle manner. They get united, but again they have to face certain kind of the impediments. On the other hand, when we look towards the tragedy, there is a very famous play which is a tragical kind of a play, and that is Othello. So there Desdemona does everything for her husband, but there is a loss of her faith, and there she is not able to escape from a kind of a hatred which Othello was having for Desdemona. So there is a kind of a concept of uh, their chastity. They are pure, they are kind, but still governed by a kind of a system. Later on, where we go towards the modern drama, modern plays, there is only one Shakespearean comedy where we have seen a kind of a character. That means later on when he was writing these kind of the plays, if you want to note down, you can note down, that is Twelfth Night, and another play that is Much Ado About Nothing. So there is a kind of a character that is Voila. So Voila is the one who is actually breaking the norms of the patriarchal community. So the roles which are being presented by the Shakespearean heroine, so what she is doing, she is just changing the scenario. And same is there with the Beatrice also, where she is saying that I don't like this man. And every time there is a kind of hate and love kind of a relationship. So these are very beautiful plays apart from the plays which are being mentioned in your course book. So if you will see, then you will find that you will find that females are being projected in a very different kind of a manner.
Thank you so much, ma'am.
Okay, thank you.
First of all, thanks so much from your outstanding lecture, dear lady. Uh, and second, my question is about what is the specific purpose of romantic comedy?
Specific purpose of a romantic comedy. Okay, the concept of the comedy you have understood. That means it is something which deals with a unification. Second thing is hero and the heroine. Okay, so the end is something which is not a kind of a drastic end, but it ends with a sense of a lighter note. There is no darker theme, there is no suspense, there is no melodious plot, but the playwright takes this thing in a very subtle manner. And how he takes it in a very subtle manner, that means both the boy and the girl, they fall in love with each other, and both of them are of marriageable age. If you will just look towards the plot lines is something that means either the girl belong to the higher society, the boy belong to the lower society, girl is rich, boy is vice versa, or there is a kind of an evil old father who will become a kind of an impediment between their life, or there is a kind, if I'm talking about, or of no reason. Like if you see in 12th Light, there is a character that is Olivia. Duke Orsino has deeply fallen in love with this girl, Olivia, but she cannot revert it back because she has taken a kind of a pledge, and she is saying that since I am mourning for the death of my brother and father, so I'm not going to marry for 7 years. So there is a kind of a condition which they are going to bring, and that is how the plot is further executed, and that determines and that is presented in a kind of a comical manner with their wit, with their humor. They will bring a kind of a blend of humor or wit through which audience will laugh with their roles, because we know that this misunderstanding is something which is being created and we will enjoy, but the players or the person who are enacting it on stage, they will never realize that what is happening.
Thanks so
So
much,
these
dear
are
lady.
some.
Thanks so much.
Okay, thank you
Thank
so
you.
much. Any other question?
Sorry, ma'am. Another
Okay.
question. What is the moral lesson of the Midsummer Night's Dream?
Okay. The moral lesson of Midsummer Night Dream. See, this is something which is like opening a kind of a plethora of criticism. So that is up to you, that how you see it. Because as I tell you that whenever we are looking into a kind of a text, so if we are trying to find the truth, so we have to go into truth leads to a then further one perspective leads to the another perspective lead to the third perspective. So whenever there is a kind of a book which is being presented in front of you, so that is, it is open for an open criticism. So that is your perspective. That is, it doesn't mean that if I'm saying that it can be considered as a kind of a dream work, that means since the title is suggesting this thing that a midsummer night dream, midsummer dream. So what does it mean? It means that we are being taken into a kind of a dream world, and that dream world is something where there is a kind of a strong relationship between the gods, the fairies, and the human beings, and how they go through all these kind of the changes. So the main take, if you will just go through this play, so the even though it is a very good kind of a love story, and that is something whenever we are reading a love story or a romantic comedy, we know that there is a kind of a misunderstanding. But another thing which is very, very important, there are so many things which are not yet being opened. If we are just talking about the pup, or if we are just talking about bottom, they are the one, if we are going to read it in the form of a postmodern perspective, it's not about the main major characters. It's not about the love stories of the three people which is running behind. It's about those people who are not being questioned. It's about the mechanicals, the role of the mechanicals. So that is how, that is your vision, that is your take. Because on one hand, we can say that it projects um, a kind of a criticism towards the power and authority. On the other hand, the young people are rebelling. They are asking a kind of a question. That means they are questioning patriarchy. So that is how. And then the dream. So the concept of dream, the psychological aspect of the dream is something which is very, very important, and it can be considered as one of the major things we should learn through this play. Okay, so these are the takes which we should take from the play. So here, when we are reading the text, it doesn't mean that what is my perspective, what I am trying to explain you is something which you are going to read the text in that manner. No, you may have your own perspective, you may have your own vision, you may have your own question. That is something which is going to be implemented, and that is how you are going to channelize and how you are going to produce a new critical work. That is something which delivers, which declares a kind of a text, and that is what we call as a research, which is a new critical thinking.
Thank you, ma'am, so much.
If you are just going to read this play, just come up with these kind of the points, because when we read a play, this is something a kind of a standard structure through which definitely we are going to say that you have to go through the structure, you have to go through the plot, you have to go through the lines, you have to go through the theme. No, you can ponder, you can come up with other kind of the questions. It is up to you how you are going to read it and how you are going to explore your ideas. Okay, and I think there are no more questions. So thank you so much for listening. So I will be having my next session. So I was mentioning about the comedy of manners. So now we are going to read about what is comedy of humors in with respect to Ben Jonson, Alchemist. So the next topic which I'm going to deal is block number 4, and that is The Alchemist by Ben Jonson. So don't get confused. The Alchemist is again a kind of a novel which is being written by Paul Coelho. That is a novel, but here, since we are going to read the Renaissance period and the classical period, so we are going to talk about Ben Jonson's concept of the alchemist. So I will meet you in my next lecture. So thank you everyone for listening so patiently. And if you have any other further question, we can have it on next session. Thank
Thanks
you
so
so
much. Bye
much.
bye. Thanks so much. Bye bye.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, ma'am.
Okay.
سلام علیکم غیور صاحب څنګه یې ښې جوړې صفی الله غږ مې اوري هلو صفی الله غیور غږ مې اوري ورور